Hey YouTube, it's your boy Shelby Shambles here. I wanted to take a moment and talk about the disastrous earnings calls this week from many of the biggest tech companies in the world. And why I think that is. So let's start just generally. I think during the last bull market, it's pretty obvious that there was a huge bubble around these tech companies. As speculators and retail investors sort of piled in, and I think that had to burst and it had to bring them down from their all-time highs. Now I think that the 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 shedding value that we're seeing is frankly unbelievable. Seeing these companies who are household names, hitting 52-week lows every single day is mind blowing to me. And I think that there's a specific case for each company. But I first want to talk about the general atmosphere, the general environment before I really drill into each company. And that is, I think that things have gotten a lot harder for these big tech companies. I think as the economy slows down, as interest rates go up, as people have less money to spend, the first thing they're sort of looking to offload are some of the services that these companies provide. Simply because not all of these companies, obviously, but many of these companies provide some sort of I don't want to say frivolous, but frivolous experience. Instagram isn't really necessary for most people. Um, Apple gadgets aren't necessary for most people. And I think as the economy starts to contract and contract and contract, we're seeing people, sort of shedding the consumer sides of these companies, at least in some part. Um, so I think that's part of it. I think they had to come down. I think there's a little bit of an overreaction from the markets. As these companies start to fall, people just sort of throw shares. They just start selling and selling and selling, and it triggers the sell off. And I think there's a little bit of a market overreaction to, just these companies starting to fall. So that's sort of generally how I see it. Also, I think that the markets are starting to sell these tech companies that do really well in a bull market for more reliable stocks that do better in general, right? Sort of blue chip stocks, Berkshire Hathaway, a lot of retail outfits, a lot of industrials, a lot of energy companies, right? So I think we're seeing this flood from tech stocks over to uh, less high growth stocks, less technical stocks, more sort of firm grounded stocks. So that's sort of generally what I think is happening. And so let's dig into the specifics. First foremost, I want to talk about Meta. Meta is getting absolutely crushed. I think uh, Mark Zuckerberg lost $100 billion in net worth. He fell from the third richest person in the world to the 23rd. Absolutely nut stuff. And I think that's a lot of because uh, he's trying to make this idea of the metaverse as the next internet catch on. It's this whole VR thing. He's thinks is gonna happen. This whole AR thing that he thinks is gonna happen. And when you run one of the biggest companies in the world, it's hard. Uh, it makes investors skittish when you talk about things like that, and when you talk about innovation like that. They want uh, reliable short-term returns, not so much. I mean, they expect you to have a long-term vision, but they expect more. How are you doing quarterly? To take precedence over what's going on. 2 or 4 years down the line. They also have some irresponsible management decisions. I've heard a lot of bad things about their finances. A lot of bad things about their balance sheet. Um, that have made people kind of waver on them. Um, but maybe I think there does exist a world in which there is a metaverse. There is, that they crack the gem they're trying to make happen, and they're the only player in it in that market. And if they could do that, it's gonna pay off huge, and if not, um, they'll have a tougher time. So I don't know that they are. To me, they are speculative, very, very, very speculative at this point. But if you do believe in the company, if you do have faith in um, Zuck's ideas and the direction the company's headed, it's not a bad time to get involved. Now, on to Google. I think Google, from what I've heard from people inside the company, what I've heard from what I've experienced myself developing on top of Google, infrastructure, is that Google is fairly poorly managed. There's a lot of internal debate. There's a lot of internal um, politics being played. Departments have their own purview and they get territorial. And there's not a lot of cohesion between different parts of the company. And I think that this is reflected in the poor quality of their products, frankly. I'm not throwing shade at Google. I think that their search engine is amazing. Their um, browser is amazing. The stuff when they really really try, they can get it right. But they have to find a better way, in my opinion, to organize the company and to bring their resources really to bear, or they're just gonna fall flat and they're gonna flounder. Um, and I think this speaks to a commonality probably between all of these companies, which is that when you build a company, not that I've ever been the head of a Fortune 500 company, but when you build a company up to that size, it becomes unwieldy, and it doesn't matter how slick your advertising campaign is. It doesn't matter how pleasant your color palette is. It doesn't matter, um, you know, what your exterior is showing. You need to have a solid organizational premise, and you need to build up a really, really solid organization. It's less about innovation. It's less about the R&D aspect, and more just how efficiently does your organization function, right? And I'm not saying it has to function as a hierarchy, and I'm not saying it has to function as this egalitarian worker collective. I'm saying that if everyone in your company isn't rowing in the same direction, your boat's not going to get where it needs to go. And especially with these bigger companies like Google, like Meta, I don't think the organization is really there, in my opinion, and I could be wrong. Um, Now, the big one, and I've said before, I really like Amazon as a stock. They underperformed. They absolutely fell off a cliff. And I don't know. I I really don't know. I've heard that it's bad management. I've heard that they're mismanaged. I mean, obviously they are, if not the biggest company, then one of the biggest companies in the world. They're everywhere, right? They are. Sorry, I'm still a little bit under the weather. They are doing shipping and goods and online marketplaces and cloud computing and uh, streaming and music, and they are everywhere. And all of these different uh, cogs have to spin in time with one another. And if they are wavering, if there is um, an inefficiency in the company, again, it comes back to organizational efficiency. If there is some part of the organization that isn't quite working in tandem with everything else, it's gonna spiral out, because especially a company like Amazon, there's so many moving parts. And if your management isn't going in there and putting out fires all day long, that's their job, right? They have to get in there and they have to like put out these fires, and they have to spend their entire day solving problems. And if they're not willing to do that, if they're not doing that, if they're just making a fat paycheck and sitting back and, not doing what they need to do, then the organization's going to fall apart. And I really do think that, generally speaking, these big tech companies are falling prey to their own massive, bloated bureaucracies. I think in a lot of cases. And it remains to be seen if this is as catastrophic as the housing crisis, if this is big tech's Lehman Brothers moment. But I do think that if it doesn't serve as a wake up call to these companies, they're going to have a tough time. I mean, like being on top, being the biggest companies in the world is a tough job, right? You need to do it right. And if you're not doing what you need to do to preserve that, there are hundreds of other companies waiting to capitalize on you falling apart and to rise up. So we'll see how Apple does in earnings. Apple is sort of different. They're a big tech company, but they have almost their own closed ecosystem, right? Where Google integrates with other products, where Amazon, integrates with a larger ecosystem. Apple's just closed, right? Apple fanboys and fangirls have the watch, the computer, the streaming platforms, all that. Um, so they're a little bit different. They're more on the consumer side and the tech side. So we'll see. Maybe they'll save it. Maybe they'll pick up the ball. But I mean, that remains to be seen. Either way, thanks for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me and sticking around and tuning in. I'll talk to you guys next time, and until then, take care.